and welcome to this edition of Hidden History Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co host, Ray Smith. Good morning, Ray.
Good morning, Keith. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. A little wet here in East
Yeah,
Tennessee,
it is raining.
and a little warm compared to other parts of the country, that's for sure.
This
I'm
is a
not.
strange
I,
February. I'm telling you, this weather's been more like, and it's fooling the flowers and the trees. They're
yeah,
beginning to come
I know.
out. In March, we'll have a cold spell that'll do damage to them, but
Well,
not good.
I've got about 2 more weeks of school, and then we have spring break. And of course, we're all saying like, well, it's going to wait to snow till it's spring break. So, but I'll take it anytime. So,
Yeah,
all right, Ray, why don't you introduce our guest today?
I'll be glad to. We've got Heather McClenahan with us today. Heather and I go back a ways. She's from Los Alamos, where I knew her and met her. I don't think she's living there now. You'll have to tell us in a minute when I give you a break. But I got to know her really well when we were working together on the Manhattan Project National Historical Park. We made some trips to Washington, D.C. We were up there when it was signed when the agreement was signed on November the 10th, 2015. And she's since retired. She was the executive director of the Los Alamos County Museum, the historical society there as well. She participated in that for a number of years. And she's just a wealth of information about Los Alamos, the atomic bomb, the project. And she's now working on an exhibit for an Robert Oppenheimer exhibit. And I'm sure she'll be telling us about that. Heather, where are you living now so I can correct my misunderstanding of where you're
Yeah,
at?
yeah. So I'm actually in the southern part of New Mexico now. We are in Las Cruces, which is where New Mexico State University is. My parents and my husband all went to school here. We love Los Alamos and its history, but it's up in the mountains and it's cold. And as we got older and got to retirement, we wanted a little bit warmer climate. So we're down here and loving our New Mexico green chili, which is grown here right by Hatch, is right here by Las Cruces, world famous Hatch green chili. And so we're down here. But yeah, I am still doing some Los Alamos work. And so when you want me to, I'll launch into that.
Well, good. I appreciate that. I love that chili too. You're in a good spot for it.
Yeah.
And you're right. The southern New Mexico is quite different from
It,
up in the mountains.
It is, Los Alamos, everybody thinks of New Mexico as a desert, and it is, but where Los Alamos is high desert. It's very mountainous. The Rocky Mountains don't end at Colorado. They keep on coming down. And so the Santa Fe, Los Alamos area is very mountainous. Los Alamos is built on this plateau with a big range of mountains behind it, the Jemez Mountains, and just a beautiful, beautiful area. Of course, Oppenheimer and General Groves chose Los Alamos partially because of its beauty, but also because of its isolation. And so, yeah, it's up in the mountains. Down here in Las Cruces, we also have mountains, but it's very, very, it's Chihuahuan desert. And so it's much drier. No pine trees like Los Alamos used to have before the fires.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very different climate and much warmer.
Well, good. Tell us a little about your current project. Let's start talking about that.
Well, this goes back actually quite a ways. Some of your listeners have probably heard of Cindy Kelly and the Atomic Heritage Foundation.
Right.
In the early 2000s, Cindy was visiting with some people. So Los Alamos, for folks who don't know the history of the community itself, there was a boys' school there, a very prestigious prep school. And there were some buildings there. There was a beautiful 3-story log lodge, and then some small cottages that the teachers from the school lived in. And that was one of the reasons that General Groves wanted Los Alamos for the project, was because of this infrastructure that was there. There was running water, there was electricity, there were these buildings that they could move right into. Well, those teachers' cottages became what is now known as Bathtub Row. They were the only houses in Los Alamos that had bathtubs during the war, because of course bathtubs back in those days were made of iron, and all the iron was being used for the war effort. So all of the dormitories and other housing that was built in Los Alamos was done with showers. So these were the only homes with bathtubs, and they were really beautiful, log and stone cottages, that sort of Western heritage 1920s and 30s is when they were built. And so there are these really lovely little homes, and quite small. I think when Oppenheimer lived in his, it was only about 800 or 900 square feet. So here's the director of the laboratory, living in this tiny little house. But it is a lovely little home, and it's on Bathtub Row there. And so Oppenheimer lived in one. Deke Parsons, who was really kind of the assistant director at the laboratory, and the naval captain who armed the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima, lived next door on one side. And then Edwin McMillan, who won the Nobel Prize in chemistry and was very instrumental in the work at the laboratory, lived on the other side. So, and then Hans Bethe eventually lived in that house too. But so we've got, just this wonderful history on this one little street in Los Alamos. So back in 2003, Cindy Kelly met with the people who were living in the house that Oppenheimer had lived in. And they had been in that house for decades, and they had no heirs. And she visited with them and said, well, what would you think about giving your house to the Historical Society when you pass away? And they, they loved the history of the community, very involved in it. Helene, the woman of the house, was one of the volunteers at the museum. And they said, you know what, that's a great idea. So they put the house in a life trust. And they said, and the agreement was, as long as Helene and Jerry Sudam lived, that they would live in the house, but that the house actually belonged to the society. And so Jerry then passed away, I think in like 2012, something like that. Helene, bless her heart, lived until 2020. She was 100 years old when she passed away, and just such a pillar of the community, somebody that we could always go to, always had a great story to tell, and just a really, really wonderful person. But what they did was they forgave any debt. There was the house just came to the society with no strings attached, basically. And so after Helene passed away, we had some historic, I say we, I haven't been there for since 2019, but it's still very close to my heart, as you can tell. And so we had a historic architect come in and do some assessments on the house. And this is an award-winning architect out of the northern New Mexico area in historic preservation. And so they're a really, really great team. And unfortunately, they have found some pretty significant damage in the house. There's some major structural issues. The house was built in the late 1920s, and it was by a stonemason who was trained in the craft, but nobody expected the house necessarily to be around 90 plus years later. And so there's a lot of structural issues. It needs a new roof. All of the wiring is, let's just say, not up to code. All of the wiring has to be redone. I mean, instead of a panel with breakers on it, the electrical panel still has fuses, and there were some copper pennies in some of the fuses. I mean, so there is a significant amount of work that needs to be done. But that work is starting, and the Historical Society is raising money to do that. So, if anybody wants to donate, losalamoshistory.org is the place to go. And we'd appreciate any support. But in the meantime, what I am doing is I am starting on the exhibits for the house, which is just a really, really wonderful opportunity. Now, the house has been added on to a little bit over the years. So we're up to a whopping 1,200 square feet now. And so trying to tell the story of one of the most complicated people in 20th century history, Robert Oppenheimer, in this 1,200 square feet is an exciting challenge. And so what we're looking at, what I've said for years, is that this will never be a typical historic house museum. And there's lots of reasons for that. One is, as most of your listeners, I'm sure, know, historic house museums are really struggling throughout the nation, because they're not dynamic. They're not what today's audiences want to see. They don't want to see furniture behind a velvet rope. They want to know people stories, and they want to interact with what's happening or what happened in that history. And so that's really what we're looking for. We don't have any of Oppenheimer's furniture anyway, so we could never put it behind a velvet rope. But we want this to be a place where people really come in and think about big questions, and think about, really, what does it mean to be the father of the atomic bomb? And I think it's really apropos that we're talking about this right now, because we're just at the 1 year anniversary of when Russia invaded Ukraine, and people had not thought about nuclear weapons for probably 30 years, and all of a sudden there's a big panic about nuclear weapons again. Well, those of us who are in that environment and have been around, the scientists who work on them and stuff, we're probably not in a panic. But this is giving us an opportunity to say, what responsibility do citizens have in a nuclear world? What do we need to know to talk to our elected leaders about these weapons of mass destruction, and how do we deal with them? And, how do we not approach them in fear, but approach them in knowledge? And so I think that, the House is really going to give us the opportunity to ask some of these questions and to really have people think about them. It will also, of course, we'll have biographical information about Oppenheimer, who was just a brilliant, charismatic, fascinating person. And we'll hopefully, break some of the myths about Oppenheimer too. I just recently, a friend and colleague, James Konetka, who is a historian out of Texas and has done quite a bit of work on the Manhattan Project, wrote a wonderful, wonderful book called The General and the Genius about Oppenheimer and General Groves. And he did a presentation talking about Oppenheimer in the media, because I don't know if your audience knows this, but in this July, a major $200 million feature film is coming out called Oppenheimer. It's by director Christopher Nolan, who is, of course, very famous, very big in Hollywood. And
in addition, if I can
yeah.
In addition to that, NBC Studios is producing a 2-hour documentary on Oppenheimer that will run before the movie. Now, I've never heard of anything like this, but it's interesting how this is happening. I'm surprised. You may have already been contacted by NBC, have you?
I have not. And
can I give them your name?
yes, that would be fine. I'd be happy.
They contacted me and said, we were doing a documentary film on Oppenheimer and we want to include Oak Ridge. And I said, well, he wasn't here very much at all. His brother was here, and he did visit his brother at some point in 1943. And then again, we have the most iconic picture of him that I believe is Ed Westcott made at the guest house. And by the way, I framed that picture and put it up on the mantle there in the Alexander guest house now. It's a senior living center. But that picture was made in 1946. So I told him, I said, I'll give you everything I've got, but you're not going to get much about Oppenheimer in Oak Ridge.
Right.
I will connect you with, I forget his name now. I'll connect you up though.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great.
Excuse me, Ray, you said the documentary is coming out before the film. That's not uncommon.
Oh, it's not?
No, it's not uncommon. As a matter of fact, I remember seeing a documentary on Seabiscuit that was on PBS a couple of years before the motion picture came out.
Okay.
So that's really not that uncommon. It's been done before, and basically what it does is it teases the audience. It gives them some facts to base the movie on, and it's good for both the documentary and the feature film, to be quite honest. So
well, let me grab something here. So yeah, one of the great things about the film is it's based on this book, which is a Pulitzer Prize winning biography of Oppenheimer. Now, Martin Sherwin, the co-author on this, who worked on it for over 25 years, unfortunately has passed away, but his co-author, Kai Bird, has, what I understand, read the script in a hotel room, had to leave the script there, could come out and tell them what he thought. But that was kind of the end of his.
You and I have met Kai Bird when we were in DC, and he is quite knowledgeable. I mean, probably has more knowledge of Oppenheimer than any other individual I know, other than maybe you. But he's written a book about it. And
Yeah, yeah. It is a
sure that
great book.
they'll take some liberties with the film. I mean, we understand that, but
Sure,
Christopher
sure.
Nolan is an excellent filmmaker. So
It's interesting, Ray, that talking about the film and talking about the process of filmmaking, because that's kind of my field. Um,
yeah,
I saw I saw an interview with Tom Hanks, and when he and Steven Spielberg were making Band and were planning to make Band of Brothers,
mhm,
he went and had a meeting with Richard Winters, who was kind of the main guy in Band of Brothers, and Richard Winters was a little concerned about how how accurate things were going to be. And Tom
right,
Hanks said, "Listen," he said, "this is the movie business." He says, "You're going to say things that you never said. You're going to go places that you never went." He says, "If we get 12% of it accurate," he said, "that's good, but we're shooting for 17% of it to be accurate."
Wow. Wow.
So, I mean, anytime that Hollywood comes out with a historical film, people don't need to take it at face value. It's important for them to learn besides the film
yeah.
what the real story is. So I know a lot of people, everybody in our world, is anxious to see what happens with the
Yeah.
film. So
Well,
I
and
know
you
I
make
am.
a really good point, because one of the things that Christopher Nolan has told us is that he is storytelling.
Yeah.
And so he is creating a narrative, and he is compacting a very complex person, a very complex series of issues, a very complex timeline into a 2-hour movie.
Yeah,
So, yeah, we have to respect his art, I think, as historians on the one hand. On the other hand, some things are going to make us cringe, and that's
of
just going to
course.
be the way it is. Ray, I know you remember when Manhattan, the TV show, came out on WGN, and um, so it was really funny in one way, because for years, always the number one question when people come into the museum is, where's the restroom? But for about a 2-year period, the number one question in the museum became, is Manhattan real? So we had all these visitors coming in asking these questions, and we said, oh my gosh, the rest of our careers we're going to be spending, fixing all of these myths. But it was okay, because what
Yeah.
I think it's getting back to Jim's point here is that it opens up doors, and it opens up opportunities for us to get those real stories out.
Yeah, I
And
have to tell
so,
you about the Manhattan series. When they were beginning it, even before they had shown the first episode, they contacted me and we talked about, the story, what they were trying to do. And they told me, they said, look, this story is going to be about Los Alamos. We're probably not going to include Oak Ridge. And I said, okay, that's fine. But I think when you get into it, you're going to find out you can't have the story without including something about Oak Ridge. So in about a month, they called me back and they said, Ray, you're right. We need to do an episode or two that include Oak Ridge. So tell us what we need to do. So I had a good time with them. I mean, they they wound up rolling Y12 and the Oak Ridge National Laboratory together. But
sure.
you know, you got to know that they did the best they could with what time they had. And
Yeah, and it was the xenon poisoning story, right? They had the scientists come and figure that out there. So yeah, that was
they
that
did.
was
It,
good.
it was it was kind of interesting, but they, as Keith said, they were playing to the audience that they knew they had. So they wanted some of this romance in there. They wanted to add in some things that would intrigue the
Right,
audience, and
right.
took some liberties. But all in all, I enjoyed the year series that they had. I thought they did fine with it.
I liked the
But the
little
Oppenheimer movie
little
is going to be
details
better.
they got.
Yeah, they did get a few right.
Yeah. But and that is back to talking about Jim Konetka and the presentation that he gave recently on Oppenheimer. He was talking about how, Oppenheimer has been depicted in many television shows, many movies over the years, and that he is very often depicted as this conflicted scientist who, is working very hard on the Manhattan Project, but is so bothered by the fact that he's making weapons of mass destruction and just struggling. And that the historical record doesn't show that at all. What the historical record shows is that Oppenheimer wanted to become the director of the project and went to Groves. In fact, the quote is that he told Kitty is that he courted General Groves like a lover so that he could get the job. And then he worked passionately in Los Alamos and almost to exhaustion, really. Now, after the war, he certainly had qualms about what had happened. He never said the word regret, but he certainly, struggled with the loss of life and what that, that he felt responsible for, on the one hand. But, on the other hand, he helped choose the targets. He was adamant that there not be a test ahead of time to show Japanese officials. So this idea of him being conflicted during the Manhattan Project is very inaccurate, and that's one of the myths that we hope to bust in the house.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. He was right on target with and he never veered from it. You're right. After the war, he probably had time to sit down and think about what he'd done.
Well, they say hindsight's 20/20.
Yeah, it always is. During the process, I think he was thoroughly focused on what he thought the most important thing to do was, and that was to beat Germany. They still thought they were in a race with Germany.
Right.
And of course, talking about Oppenheimer, we can't talk about him without recognizing that within just the last few months, weeks really, the Department of Energy has done what they call vacating that results of the trial that took his clearance away, and literally took it away one day before it would have expired.
Right.
Can you imagine?
Is that right?
That blows my mind.
Yeah, and it's really complicated. There's actually really another wonderful book about the whole process that he went through called The Ruin of J. Robert Oppenheimer by Priscilla McMillan. And it was, you can see the difference if you look at pictures of Oppenheimer before 1954 and in 1955. I mean, it really, really devastated him. But he was never publicly bitter about it. He was very much, he played the role of victim well. Can we say that without sounding snotty? I don't know.
I agree, he did.
But what the Secretary of Energy has done is to bring about justice in this case, because Oppenheimer did lie to the security officers. What he did, had he done that today, he would have lost his clearance. There's no doubt about it. But the way the Atomic Energy Commission went about that hearing was completely out of their own rules, unethical. I mean, recording his attorney's conversations with him and not letting his attorneys have access to information because it was classified. I mean, just on and on and on, the way they treated him, it was so obviously set up. And it's so nuanced and complicated. Everybody talks about it being the McCarthy era, and it was, but Oppenheimer was not ousted by McCarthy. He did not have a hearing in front of McCarthy. Mm-hmm. The Eisenhower administration did not want him to, because they didn't want the atomic program to be looked at by McCarthy. So that's why the Eisenhower administration allowed the Atomic Energy Commission to move forward with the hearing and to kind of move Oppenheimer aside so that McCarthy couldn't get a hold of him. I mean, it's just,
wow.
Like I say, it's very nuanced, very complicated, but interesting. And what the secretary did recently was justice for Oppenheimer, because he did not deserve to be treated that way when he had served the United States loyally for many, many years.
Yeah, I agree. And you've got a fertile field of information there that you'll have to include as you put your story together. I don't envy you. I've been talking about Christopher Nolan making a 2-hour movie. You've got a 1,200 square foot exhibit to make out of this man's complicated life.
How do you when do you expect it to be all done and ready?
Well, that is a really great question. I mean, wouldn't it be ideal if we could have it in July? But of course, with the condition of the house, that's just not going to happen. And we really, as an organization, feel that it's much more important to get the house ready properly for the public. We don't want to have any danger,
Sure.
and the electrical system right now is dangerous. There's actually in Oppenheimer's own bedroom, the floor is caving down and collapsing because of the foundation issues. So really, we want to get the house fixed up, and so that's probably at least a year out, I would imagine. Now, hopefully, because we're getting the exhibit scripts done now, those should be done by this summer. We can hopefully start working with an exhibit design firm. And so hopefully these can be done in tandem, that the house gets fixed and the exhibits get done. And so hopefully not 2 years.
Well, we will definitely bring you back when you've got something you can show us. And we can do that more than once. If you've got something several months down the road that you've got an exhibit and you want to talk about your exhibits, what you're actually doing, and show us some of that, we would love to be one of your outlets to help promote the opening of the newly refurbished Oppenheimer home. So
that would be great. That would be great. And so just a little bit about the museum campus there.
yeah.
So the museum, these bathtub row homes, all historic homes, all still there. Fuller Lodge, the log lodge I was talking
Fuller
about.
Lodge is just a tremendous facility there.
Isn't it
had the
wonderful?
opportunity to speak there and have seen it a couple of times. You've taken me on tours, but it is tremendous. Go ahead.
Yeah, it is. It's just this big, beautiful open log room that, you love to kind of just close your eyes and imagine the scientists having dinner there and writing out things on their napkins. It's just a beautiful place. And so these buildings are all there. One of them is the museum. And then there's two privately owned homes, and this is all, within the boundaries of our new national park that we worked on, Ray. And then we have the house that Hans Bethe and Edwin McMillan, two Nobel Prize winners, lived in. And that is actually part of the museum now. That is where we have our exhibits on the Cold War.
Good.
And then the Oppenheimer house is next to that. So you're going to have these three buildings that all sort of integrate all of this history of Los Alamos. And it's really wonderful. People can walk along. And the great thing about the Los Alamos Historic District, so it's this beautiful setting with the views of the mountains and everything. And then you've got ancestral Pueblo people lived in this area from about the 1200s. And there's actually a site there that was occupied in about the 1200s probably. And visitors can view that. And then there is a cabin. There was actually homesteading that went on from the late 1800s until the Manhattan Project came in. And so we had mostly Hispanic farmers who lived in the area and farmed, and there's one of their cabins there that visitors can see. And then of course we've got the ranch school history, which is what permeates the whole historic district, and then the Manhattan Project. So it's all right there in this little walking area, and just a great place to see. And so adding over time as we are to the depth of the story, really I think will make great experience for visitors.
What is the status of the other other homes on Bathtub Row? Are they still privately held, or?
Well, actually not most of them are. So three of the original Bathtub Row homes are still privately owned. One that was privately owned has recently been purchased by Los Alamos County. And they're still in the planning stages. And I don't want to overstep and say what they're planning on doing with it, but it's going to be great if they're able to work out what they were hoping to do with it. That's the house that's right next door to the museum. It's called the Baker House, because a longtime scientist from the laboratory whose last name was Baker lived there. It's where let's see, I'm trying to think. Oh, Sir James Chadwick, who came with the British mission to Los Alamos, lived in that house when he was there. And so he and his about 20 British scientists came over to Los Alamos as part of the Manhattan Project. Now, you had some in Oak Ridge too, didn't you, Ray?
Yeah, we did. several of them came. In fact, they came to all 3 locations, but your most famous one is Klaus Fook.
Shh, you didn't have to remind me.
Yeah.
But he did come over as a British scientist, although he turned out to be a spy and fed plans to Fat Man to Russia. But his method of getting here came through being a British scientist.
Yeah, yeah,
And
that's exactly
interestingly
right.
enough, his specialty, one of his specialties at least, was gaseous diffusion. But we have no record of him ever having any, ever been in Oak Ridge at all.
Okay.
But at any rate, we had our own, you know.
Yes, yes, but they keep finding them. That's what's a little frightening.
They keep turning up. That's right.
Yeah, yeah. So, but one of the interesting stories about Klaus Fuchs is, one of the other, there's another museum in Los Alamos, the one that's run by the laboratory is called the Bradbury Science Museum. And it's a big, wonderful, wonderful facility. The lab has just done a great job showing the public about the work that the lab does. I really, appreciate what they do, and they do a lot of science education. But they have an equivalent. So Los Alamos has a sister city in Russia, which unfortunately that relationship has fallen apart over the last few years. But it's Serov, which was where their sort of Los Alamos laboratory was. And we used to have exchanges between our communities. And one day somebody came back from the visit to Serov, and they said, I went to their Bradbury, their version of the Bradbury. They have a wall of photographs, their Science Hall of Fame, and Klaus Fuchs is on that wall.
Oh, wow. Huh.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
Well, what else have you been involved in and doing that you would like to share with us?
Well, you and I were just talking about, I am the state coordinator for National History Day in New Mexico. And for folks who don't know about National History Day, some people call it Science Fair for History, but we think it's way better because, first of all, it's about history. But second of all, because the students have the opportunities to do projects like documentaries or websites, put on a performance, write a paper, or do a museum type exhibit. And so we are starting up our competition season here in New Mexico, and I imagine you are in Tennessee too. And it's just really wonderful to see the students and their projects. And there's always a theme for National History Day, and this year is Frontiers in History, People, Places, and Ideas. And it's pretty remarkable the number of students who caught on very quickly to the fact that Manhattan Project is a scientific frontier, and they're jumping on and doing that.
Well, good.
Yeah, we're doing that here in Oak Ridge and in East Tennessee. The regional East Tennessee History Day is coming up just in a week or so. And then we'll have the state event about a month later. So we'll see you at the national.
That sounds like a plan.
All right. Well, listen, we sure do appreciate you being with us today and sharing what you're doing
My
with
pleasure.
the Robert Oppenheimer exhibits. It is a choice assignment for you, but they selected the right person. I'm just so glad to know you and to appreciate the work that you've done for years and are continuing to do.
Well, the feeling is mutual, Ray.
I'm retired too, but some people say they can't tell the difference. I'm still doing everything that was doing before retirement and adding some to it. So I am staying busy and enjoying what I'm doing. We had well, not too long ago, we had Ann Hagedorn come and speak to us. He wrote the book, The Sleeper Agent, about George Coble, who was our main spy, the one that was here in Oak Ridge. But and we're having tours coming through. It's picking up again after COVID. We've
Wonderful.
added a new museum, the K-25 History Center. It
Yeah.
opened in February of 2020 and closed in March. They closed for a year and a half, but it's back open now and doing really well. And
Great.
the Project National Historical Park is continuing to flourish here, and they're doing a wonderful job of
I
that.
got to
They are in Los Alamos as well. I'm
Yes,
sure.
yes, I got to meet the new superintendent about a month ago, and she's great. And I have a thing. I love park rangers. I wanted to be one when I was growing up, and so
Yeah,
I enjoy getting to work with them. And just she's got a really great attitude about developing this park, and is very excited
no,
about it.
yeah. She was in Oak Ridge, Wendy. I met her there.
Yeah, yeah,
And she has a background in planning. So that's a rich background to bring to a new park. And for her to have that expertise, I think will add to the long-term benefit of the park for us. So
I
I was really
agree.
pleased to meet her and glad that she got the position permanently. So I think it was a good choice, the Park Service.
All
Yeah,
right. Well, very good. Well, Heather, thank you so much for being with us today. We
thank
certainly appreciate
you. It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed visiting.
it. Absolutely. Ray, who do we have lined up for our next one?
We've got Robert Burnham, who's going to be coming to us. He has written the book, The Armageddon Secret. I can't get the.
That's fine. We can see
There you
it.
go. You can see it a little bit there. It's a novel about Germany during the Manhattan Project. It's based on historical fact. Uh, Richard Rhodes has written about it. He said Burnham nicely threads the needle of atomic bomb history to stitch together the fact and fiction, imagining the German anti-Nazi underground fighting to preserve the future of humanity. Now, that's what Richard Rhodes had to say about Robert Burnham's book. I met Robert when he came through on a tour with the Stephen Ambrose tour group, and
Okay.
we got to know him there, and I bought his book, and he's agreed to come and talk to us about it. So it'll be an interesting discussion with Robert next time.
All right. Well, very good. Well, folks, thanks for joining us this week. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with a new Hidden History.